starting your week with us. Hello and welcome to Business Daily. I'm Lee Ji-yoon in Seoul. We have plenty on our plate today, so let's get started with a look at today's highlights. Alarm bells ringing after the historic Brexit vote. President Park Geun-hye and financial authorities discuss ways to minimize the negative impact of the Brexit on the Korean economy. In a world where clean air is becoming more and more precious, Korea is stepping up its efforts to learn from other countries and curb air pollution. These stories and more coming right up. But first, our top story. Britain's Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne, says he will respect the voters' choice to leave the European Union, a decision that rattled markets on Friday. Ahead of London markets reopening on Monday, Osborne said he was watching three challenges: volatility, uncertainty, and future trade relations with Europe. In a bid to calm markets, he assured that contingency plans were in place and that Article 50 should be triggered once the UK has a clear view on how to move forward. Over the weekend, EU foreign ministers had placed pressure on Britain to begin exit negotiations as soon as possible. Credit rating agency Moody's downgraded its rating outlook on the UK economy to negative as more than $2 trillion in global market value was wiped out. The British pound lost over 2% during Asia's morning trading after hitting a 31-year low on Friday. Also, in response to last week's Brexit vote, President Park Geun-hye called on her top aides to do all they can to stabilize the markets. Our Song Ji-sun reports from the nation's top office.
At a regular meeting with her senior secretaries on Monday, President Park Geun-hye called on top officials to put in motion a government-wide crisis management system to deal with the uncertainties and volatility stemming from the Brexit crisis.
시장 상황에 대한 24시간 모니터링과 함께 시장 안정화를 위해 필요한 모든 조치를 시행해서 우리 경제에 미치는 파급이 최소화될 수 있도록 해 주기를 바랍니다.
President Park stressed that the Korean economy has the financial stability and resilience to absorb the impact of Britain leaving the EU, and said that Seoul must join efforts to stabilize global financial markets through cooperation with the international community. On top of the instabilities triggered by the Brexit factor, President Park said South Korea is also facing security threats, citing North Korea's ballistic missile tests last week. The president said the nation must unite to counter those challenges, and that Seoul must continue to push through with its corporate restructuring efforts to revive the economy and to ensure it can take another leap forward.
이제 더 머뭇거리고 물러날 곳은 없습니다. 여기서 우리가 잘 결정하지 못하고 머뭇거린다면 우리 경제는 큰 어려움을 맞게 될 것입니다.
President Park will chair the National Economic Advisory Council meeting on Tuesday to discuss economic policies for the second half of this year. Seoul will look to devise effective and prompt measures to counter economic challenges on the domestic and global front and to create more jobs despite those obstacles. Song Ji-sun, Business Daily.
Also, in response to the Brexit vote, the head of Korea's Financial Services Commission, Im Jong-yong, has warned volatility will continue for some time until markets rebalance, as a number of variables are still at play. During a Brexit-focused meeting with other local financial authorities on Monday, Im said although market volatility is expected to increase for some time, it is highly unlikely to develop into a full-blown global financial crisis like the one we saw back in 2008. The Commission chair added that the government will keep a close eye on capital flows and take active and quick countermeasures if market uncertainty exceeds certain levels. And to tell us more about last week and this week's stock market action, we have our Business Daily's markets contributor, Choi Jin-seok, joining us on the phone today. Hello, Jin-seok.
Thanks for having me, Jean.
All right, let's get started by looking at the Korean stock market. Tell us about the last day of trade and the market's overall performance last week, because we saw a lot of turmoil, to say the least.
That's right. The Korean equity market buckled as Britain's vote to leave the European Union or the EU drove down most asset markets around the world. The Kospi plummeted by more than 3% to close at 1925. As expected, foreign investors who sold massive amounts of shares dragged down the index. The Kospi once fell below 1900 but rebounded as institutional investors shifted their stance to buy. The Kosdaq crashed as well, falling by 4.7% on Friday. The Korea Exchange issued a sidecar for the Kosdaq for the first time since February this year to help stabilize the market. Both indices fluctuated during the entire session as the ballots were being counted over in the UK. On a weekly basis, the Kospi fell by 1.4%, while the Kosdaq sank by almost 5%. Since most high-risk, high-return stocks are listed on the Kosdaq, the index has been showing extreme volatility.
Then how did the Korean stock market close on the first day of this week?
The Korean equity market showed strong signs of stabilizing on the first session of the week. The Kospi rose by 0.08% to close at 1926 after touching 1900 during the session. The Kospi market trimmed its intraday losses as institutional investors bought massive amounts of shares. Despite the heavy sell-off by both individual investors and foreigners, institutions bought about 400 billion Korean won or $330 million worth of stocks. The Kosdaq also erased intraday losses, closing at 648, up by over 0.1% compared to the previous session.
Do we have any potential catalysts this week in the global markets that might help ease some of the negative sentiment after the UK referendum?
Economic indicators from the so-called G2 countries are expected to give some relief to global markets. Manufacturing data from the U.S. and China will be released this Friday local time. Market participants can expect relatively positive data from both countries. If this can give hope that global economic conditions will remain stable despite some uncertainties, the market may rebound from the steep crash. Also, ahead of the manufacturing indicators, the final figures for U.S. Q1 GDP growth will be released on Tuesday, and personal spending and inflation data on Wednesday are expected to draw attention from investors.
So other than economic data, investors hope to see close cooperation from central banks to minimize the Brexit fallout. So what are some of the events that might give us an idea of how things will go?
Yeah, the Bank for International Settlements said on Saturday that global central banks are ready to cooperate to support financial stability in the wake of Britain's vote to leave the EU. Keeping this in mind, investors will first want to see what governors say about the issue. The European Central Bank, or the ECB, will hold a forum on Monday. ECB President Mario Draghi, Fed Chair Janet Yellen, and Bank of England Governor Mark Carney will all be there, which is why you can expect all eyes to be on the outcome of this meeting. In particular, as President Draghi said, the ECB is ready to respond to any Brexit turmoil last week, investors expect to get some relief from this week's forum. In addition to this, any comments from the EU summit held in Brussels from Tuesday are expected to attract a lot of attention from market participants as well. This has been Choi Jin-seok for Business Daily.
Chinese Premier Li Keqiang has declared that China is embracing the new industrial revolution and looking toward innovation-driven development. Speaking at the World Economic Forum's annual meeting of new champions in Tianjin, also known as the Summer Davos, he outlined the Internet Plus initiative that looks to boost e-commerce, cloud computing, and the mobile internet. Korea's Prime Minister Hwang Kyo-ahn, who is in China on a 5-day visit, was also in attendance. He's set to speak at the event later to talk about how Korea plans to implement cultural and technological policies to prepare for the fourth industrial revolution. Korea and Israel have kicked off their first round of free trade agreement negotiations here in Seoul. Korea's trade ministry said the two countries will discuss issues like goods, services, investment, and cooperation in technology. With Israel being Korea's 49th largest trading partner, Seoul mainly exports automobiles and wireless communication devices to Israel and imports semiconductor manufacturing equipment and electronics parts. Trade volume between Korea and Israel was $2 billion last year, but the amount has been dropping since 2012. Officials say a free trade deal would help to boost economic exchanges between the two countries. As countries around the world are implementing various policies to cut down air pollution, Korea is also jumping on the bandwagon to bring about a clean air revolution of its own. Our Shin Se-min has the story.
Cities around the world are implementing a range of measures to reduce auto emissions. The London mayor has called air pollution the world's biggest environmental challenge and is pushing to implement an ultra-low emissions zone that would require drivers of the oldest and dirtiest vehicles to pay a fine. A standard for heavy vehicles will be fully implemented London-wide starting in 2020. In France, under a new law aimed at curbing smog, cars registered before 1997 will be barred from entering Paris starting July 1st. Over in India, reports that pollution levels in Delhi aligned with those of Beijing prompted the Indian city to ban all new large diesel cars and SUVs with engines of more than 2,000 cc's and to phase out diesel taxi cabs. Korea is joining the clean air revolution, though it's been slower to make changes. It currently ranks 173rd out of 180 countries in terms of air quality, but the government is hoping to change that. The government once encouraged diesel car ownership by giving diesel car owners a tax break starting in 2009. The policy worked, though maybe too well. And Korea's Automobile Manufacturers Association says last year, nearly 45% of all registered vehicles ran on diesel, or 4 times the number in 2008. But the government is now taking a different approach. It plans to strengthen restrictions on aging diesel cars while promoting electric vehicles, with the goal of having them represent 30% of all auto sales by 2020. Experts say such efforts are a must.
Also, there is a necessary for the government and other civil society organizations to tell the general public that actually diesel vehicle is very harmful for in some aspect, right? So that's where we need to place the effective regulatory measures by the government.
Experts are optimistic that cities in Korea will be able to go all electric by 2030 by following the example set by Jeju Island. Shin Se-min, Business Daily.
In a country where over 80% of people are online with their smart devices, staying in touch has become quite easy, not just for friends, but also for company workers. But our Lee Joo-young explains how staying connected might not always be that good.
Strapped to their smartphones and tablets, many Koreans are facing more work after hours. According to a survey conducted by Korea Labor Institute on roughly 2,400 employees in the manufacturing and service sectors, nearly 90% said they are not completely off work even after their regular working hours. About 20% said they spend an additional 2 hours on their smart devices for job-related tasks. On average, these workers spend about 86 minutes per day on smart devices on weekdays, and on weekends, that gets even longer to 95 minutes. This adds up to about 11 hours of unpaid extra work a week. The bulk of the after-hour work was said to be sending or receiving emails, followed by preparing work-related files. And with 44% of those surveyed saying they're suffering from sleep deprivation due to overtime, a third of the respondents said they were even willing to take on a pay cut of 6 to 10% in exchange for not being bothered after hours. Working overtime on smartphones has been a worldwide phenomenon. Labor unions in some European countries have been taking active measures to regulate this type of work and alleviate employee stress. German car manufacturer Volkswagen disables its company email system 30 minutes after hours and activates it again half an hour before work begins. More labor unions in France are working to seal agreements with companies to ensure work emails are sent between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. In Korea, major companies like LG U+ and Samsung SDI have introduced rules that ban contacting employees for work purposes at night, on weekends and holidays, but the practice is far from widespread.
At this, a bill has recently been introduced that would restrict handing out work through phone calls or instant messages after hours. There are also calls to build in compensation mechanisms for those who end up doing overtime on their smart gadgets. Lee Ju-young, Business Daily.
And that wraps it up for today. Thanks for watching. We'll be back tomorrow with more business news that matters to you. Until then, goodbye.